In this photography tutorial, I'm going to be showing you a couple of different methods to achieve coloured backgrounds in your photographs. Stick around and I'll get started in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux, and today we're taking a look at how to get colour into the background of your shots. We've already taken a look at getting white background shots and black background shots, which are both really great options for product photography and macro as well. We specialise in macro here on the channel, so I'm going to be taking some pictures of some small subjects today. So I'm going to set up my coffee table and show you a couple of different methods that we can use to get colour into our images. Today I'm photographing some cacti. I think these are going to benefit really nicely from some nice complementary colours in the backgrounds. They've got a lot of detail, we can get nice and close. So whether you're doing macro photography or product photography, I think they're going to be a really nice subject to take a look at. If you are doing product photography, I think these are quite a good analogue for the sort of small products that you're maybe trying to photograph and make stand out on websites like Etsy or eBay. I'm going to be using the same camera setup throughout all of these different methods. I've got a Sony a7 III with 100mm f2.8 Tachina lens on the front here. That means we can get nice and close, but we can also move back and get wider shots if we need them. I've got my camera sat on a tripod, but you can shoot freehand if you want to. Just make sure to keep your shutter speed at a reasonable speed so that you're not getting any camera shake. Usually this is 1/60th of a second upwards, but the higher you can get it, the better. A lot of that is going to depend on your lighting, which we'll take a look at in just a minute. All of my shots today are going to be taken right here on my coffee table. I'm just going to be moving my cacti around and placing them in front of the camera one by one to try and find nice angles and capture that detail from quite close in. When it comes to my backgrounds, I've got a few different methods. My first one is probably the most obvious, and it involves some backdrop cards. When you're photographing small products and items like my cacti today, probably the most straightforward method of getting colour into the background of your images is to use a backdrop. I've got all of these different background gradient cards which we sell on our website, and they're really easy to place in behind your subject just to add a little bit of colour. Now this doesn't really work for much larger subjects and people. You're going to need a lot of very expensive backdrops which are difficult to move around unless you've got a full professional studio setup with rolling paper backdrops, in which case you probably already know everything that I'm going to tell you right now. If you're using some of these though, we do need to think about our lighting. I've chosen a nice green backdrop and put that behind my cactus to accentuate some of the colours found in the subject. I do have a lot of other moving parts going on here, lots of different lighting aspects to think about. I'm going to grab the camera and give you a quick tour of this setup so that you can see exactly what is doing what. You can see that our shot is looking quite nice here, looking onto that green backdrop, but the setup is perhaps looking a little bit more complicated at first glance. What we've got is two white lighting arms plugged into the Adaptalux studio. These two bottom white lighting arms are lighting either side of my cactus quite evenly, just so that we've got enough light and not too many shadows on the front of our subject. In the background we have our green backdrop being held by a little clamp. You can find any way to hold your backdrops in place, it doesn't really matter as long as they stay put. The most important part here is that we have a third lighting arm going to light that backdrop independently. You do have to think about all of your lighting completely independently from the foreground and the background. That's very important, and we'll talk about it again in just a moment. One of the joys of using backdrops like these little background gradient cards is that once you've got your lighting all set up and your subject framed in your camera, you can very quickly start to experiment with all sorts of different styles for your image. For example, we can pop some orange and red in to create almost a sunset effect, or maybe some blue would look quite nice with our subject. One thing that you do have to do when you're doing this is make sure that your color temperature on your camera isn't being affected by the change in the backdrop. Your camera might be trying to average the color temperature across the entire image, and that's going to affect how your actual subject looks. Try setting your color temperature to the temperature of your lights. For example, our two white lights are at 5700 Kelvin. If you set your camera to that setting, then whatever you put in your background will keep your image looking exactly the same. Not only the colors of the background, but the colors of your subject will be accurate. That's pretty much all there is to this first method. Put a backdrop behind your subject, light it up in a balanced way so that you're not overexposed in your subject or your background, and you're going to get some nice colors. There is a disadvantage to this though. As we scale up, and particularly when you're working in a large studio environment, moving backdrops around, changing backdrops can be both expensive and very time consuming. You don't want to be hauling different colors of backdrops around and changing them in the middle of, say, a portrait shoot. There is an alternative there, and that's by using colored light instead of colored backdrops. With the Adaptalux Studio, we actually have colored lights built in, so this is a red LED light. If we shine a colored light like this against a white backdrop, that in itself is going to provide us with a colored background. I've got the same cactus sat with the same lighting, with one exception. I've changed that white lighting arm on the background for a red lighting arm. Now, if you don't have colored backdrops, try using something like paper. This is a nice crisp white paper, but with our red coloured lighting arm, you can see that we're actually getting a coloured background. Now the effect is a little bit different, and you're going to need to change your exposures here. You might need a little bit more light on your background and a little bit less on your subject, or vice versa. Being able to control all of your lighting independently from your foreground to your background is very important. You also need to be able to control it in the direction that it's facing, so you don't want a lot of coloured light spilling onto the front of your subject. That's going to change the way it looks, and if you're shooting products in particular, you don't want to be misleading people by having a lot of colour on the front of your subject, which isn't there in real life. You can light your subject from behind a little bit, and you can make use of some of this light reflecting onto your subject from behind. It's going to add a little bit of rim lighting, which can be quite nice, but it's up to you. There's a few different options there, but make sure to keep your key lights, your lights at the front that are giving your subject its illumination, keep that separate from the lights that are lighting your background. I do have one last method for you if you don't have coloured lights or a coloured backdrop. Something that most of us have lying around is screens. This might get a little bit expensive for doing your portraiture or larger shoots, but it's great for products and small subjects like these. You can see that we've still got my same subject. I've got my same lighting pointing at the subject with those two white lighting arms diffused, and then we've got my backdrop. Because this laptop screen is creating its own light, I don't actually need to light this at all. It's just running a gradient video. It's going between different gradients of color, which I think is a really nice effect, and if you want some varied backgrounds, you're going to get one every couple of seconds. Placing my laptop back there gets a really nice, beautiful color on the backdrop of my image. The problem with this is that you can see here we're getting a lot of reflections. You do need to make sure that the glass screen of your laptop is angled in such a way that those reflections are not pointed back into your camera. Using a screen as a background or even a shooting surface can be a really effective way to get lots of color and a lot of variation into your images. If you're getting really close though, make sure that your background is out of focus, or you're going to start seeing the pixels of the screen itself. You also need to make sure that your shutter speed isn't synchronized with the refresh rate of the screen, otherwise you're going to get some flickering. Obviously, if you're shooting a much larger subject, you're going to need a much larger screen. Not all of us have giant screens lying around in our studios, but you might try using a projector onto a white wall. That would create the same sort of effect, but you still need to keep that control over your foreground and background lighting, otherwise you're going to blow out all of that color that's created on the background. If you've used any of these techniques for your backgrounds, let me know down in the comments, especially if you have a different method to the ones that I've shown you today. I want to know about it. Hit me up in the comments and make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. If you learned something today, consider checking out some of our other videos and subscribing to the channel. That's all that I've got time for now though, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.